Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, Amy Heavilin from Vivacious Victorians is joining me. Thank you for joining me, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell me about your background.
So I am definitely not a preservationist by trade. I'm actually a high school band director, and my husband is a computer programmer, and we fell in love with old houses right about the time that we got married. And we've lived in a couple different places due to jobs and moving to be closer to family and things like that. But every single house we bought has been progressively worse.
Oh, no.
Which is exciting. It's like every house teaches us something new that leads us to the next house. And
yes.
So it's just been really fun. And so through that, we've gotten involved with some local preservation and just wanting to hopefully help people to know that sometimes scary houses are actually really fun to restore, and people can learn and gain the skills to be able to do it themselves.
So, and you said when about the time you got married, you started to fall in love with these older houses. Was there something specific that drew you in, or?
Well, I student taught in New Philadelphia, Ohio, which is a little town sort of between Columbus and Pittsburgh. That's like the best way to describe it for people that aren't familiar with that area. And the high school was in a downtown area that was just filled with old Victorians and old houses, and just walking around, like I just was really drawn to them. And it just, and I was really drawn to the ones that weren't perfect. Like I liked kind of seeing that, like, oh, this would be really neat if it was fixed up. And
right.
Of course, we didn't know how to do any of that. And we bought our first house when I taught there. First I rented a house where I was living on the second floor. It was a Victorian, and I had the second floor apartment. And I really liked it. I liked, just how grounded it felt and warm it felt. And then we bought a house that was actually in really good shape. It was built in the 1920s, and it was a little farmhouse vernacular in that city. And so we lived there for a couple of years before we came to Indiana. So,
yeah, I think that people are typically drawn towards older buildings, even if they don't realize why they're drawn to them. Like even the neighborhoods are different than like a development.
Right. And I mean, just, the big trees and, just the whole atmosphere just was really great.
Yeah. So tell me about your Vivacious Victorian blog.
So when we live in Franklin, Indiana now, which is just south of Indianapolis. And we bought this Victorian house that we're living in now. And this is definitely our forever home unless something crazy happens. But it is a 3-story Queen Anne Victorian, about 4,600 square feet. And it was raining on the indoors when we bought it.
Oh my goodness.
It was vacant for several years and had been foreclosed on, and really just the roof had failed. That was, people didn't live there. And so we decided to rescue her. And I would post pictures on Facebook, and I would post pictures on Facebook of the things that we were doing, and people were like, you really should start blogging about this. And I had no idea like what that meant and what that would entail. Then one day I was just like, okay, sure. So I jumped on WordPress and I figured some things out. And I had done high school yearbook, which gives me absolutely no basis for anything. I sort of I knew how I liked pictures to be on pages and things like that. So it was just, when I started thinking about it as, okay, this is like an online diary that I can show what we're doing and like show family and friends that are like, what are you doing with this place? So, yeah.
Oh, that's fun. And I do think it's a little bit intimidating, like when you see the back end of WordPress, but it's really easy. Like after to post at least is easy.
Right. And then every time if there's like an update, I'm like, don't change anything. I know exactly how everything works. I don't want to change.
We were struggling with that last week. I was on your blog prepping for this, and I love that you mix like your project with the history, like Victorian bathrooms, and then your bucket list of things that you want to do. So
right, which of course I probably won't do many of them, but it's nice to do.
So do you get, I saw that you were asking people to add things to the bucket list. Have you got anybody to add?
There's definitely some people that have added things like I don't think I had anything on there about like learning how to do our own plaster work. I think somebody suggested adding that, which I was like, that's terrifying to me, but would be really, really cool.
Yeah.
So there definitely are some things that people have put on there for sure. Some of it I think is really, really attainable. Some of it, like, I just need more money and I'm a public school teacher, so it's probably not going to happen.
Right.
Like, I'm like, I want to restore a mid-mod house. Like, I think that would be fun.
Well, and that, yeah, I agree with you. That would be fun. But part of the problem with those materials is they're not repairable like the older buildings are.
Right. Absolutely. So yeah, but it is certainly fun to dream. And it's nice to see other people who have said, like, when I put down that I wanted to learn how to stain glass, I had several people that said, oh, I've done stained glass before and this is really neat. And so it's neat to have other people steer you in directions. Yeah. Like the old house community is really great. Like, I think, there's a lot of terrible communities on the internet, but the old house community is really good. People are very supportive and everybody has their strengths. Like, I mean, tiling is a strength, like, and doing tile design is a strength of mine. But, there are other things that I'm not as good at, but it's nice where we can all sort of find each other and say like, oh, I'm good at this. I'm not good at this. Let's put you two together and figure out how you guys can give each other support and ideas.
That's great. Yeah, I haven't spent a lot of time on old house community forums, but maybe I need to. I really hadn't spent a lot of time like in forums in general, just because I try not to be a joiner.
Right. No, I totally get that. And I mean, there are definitely I don't know, avenues of people. Like, you have people that will just want to disown people if they paint woodwork. And you have other people that are like, it's your house, do whatever you want with it. But overall, there's a lot of positivity and a lot of people who are like, yes, we've been there, we've done that. We've all had, a ceiling fall down on us when it's not supposed to. It's okay. You'll get through it. It'll be fine.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's, I tend to, and I think it's with any community, but there are some people in the preservation community that tend to be pretty militant. So I could see people getting upset about painting woodwork. Right. But I tend to be more in that, well, it's your house, and if it can be undone, it's not something that's going to cause permanent damage. So tell me about the houses that you've restored, because you have several houses listed on your blog.
Yeah, well, and almost every house has sort of come with a job change. So when the houses that I really focus on the blog have been since we moved to Franklin, Indiana, which is where we live now. The first house that we lived in was in the historic downtown area where we still live. It's about 3 blocks away. And it was it's a folk Victorian house. It was built in 1875. And it really did not have a whole lot wrong with it. It had been the local college baseball team had lived there. So it had been a rental. Yeah. And one of those things where like you didn't have any doors in the refrigerator when we bought it. So there was definitely some it had been stripped of everything pretty. The woodwork was still in really great shape. The floors were in great shape. But everything else was just very like renter grade. So that was where we first started. We're like, let's make a really fancy bathroom. So we made a really fancy bathroom and we learned how to tile. And I'm really great at saying, this is what I want, and this is what the vision is. And I'm good at kind of the researching the design side of things. And then my husband, who's very engineer oriented, like when I say, hey, this is what I want to do, he's like, okay. And then he likes the puzzle of figuring out like what's behind the walls and how can I get behind the walls without tearing the walls out, and what can we do? And that partnership, I think, has worked really, really well. So in that house, we did 2 bathrooms, and one of those bathrooms ended up winning the Reader Remodel contest for This Old House magazine. So that was really fun. So it got to be in a magazine, and we're like, it's like our little baby. We're very proud of it. And then we also did some work on the kitchen, and that house was just beautiful. And we were in the stage of thinking, like, is this our forever house? It's not exactly what we want, but it has so many charming things about it. And we were at the point of like making a list of, well, what can we do to make this the perfect house? Or do we go look for something else? And then in the middle of that process, the Victorian house that we live in came on the market. And so it was ridiculously cheap. So we knew something was wrong with it. And so we were like, okay, let's just go see it. In between those 2 houses, we actually bought the house next door to that first house in Franklin. It had gone into foreclosure. It was insanely cheap. And so we thought, we're going to stay in this house for a while. Let's buy this really, really cheap house next door. Like if we fix it up and then rent it out, we could be landlords, and like it'll pay for itself. So we fixed that house up. We did for that house, we tried to keep the historical nature in mind while also being conscious of it's going to go to renters. And the person who rented it actually is the person who was our house painter for the exterior of our house. So he loves old houses, and he's been in there for like 6 years, and he's amazing. So that part's great. So we have this little Victorian cottage, and then we bought the Victorian that we live in now. And so that's the 3rd house that's on the blog, and that's the one we're working on now. So we sold the first house because we made the leap and said, let's go buy this house that's 3 blocks away and save it. So we still have the rental, but now we're fixing up this one.
That's impressive. I hate moving, so you're doing much better than I am.
I am like the weirdest person because I don't like packing things up, but I love unpacking things. Like if I move someplace, I love like the idea of figuring out where everything's home is. Like it's very fun to me. And I know that's bizarre, but
I think that everything should be put away. So I think that's a good, I don't understand the people who are living out of boxes years later. So, So, do you have any tips that for other homeowners that are wanting to start their own preservation projects, or that want to kind of try to figure out how to do it themselves, but maybe with historically sensitive?
Sure, absolutely. So, the number one thing I think is just know your limits and don't be afraid to ask questions. When you get into a house project, or when you are looking at a house and you're not sure if you can buy it, talk to the people that are in that community, because the people in that community are going to know the most about it. They're going to know who the person is that does windows really well. They're going to know the people that can come and walk around and give you an idea of the shape of the floors or the shape of the roof. Because a lot of times if you have contractors or people that are not historically motivated, they're going to want to like rip all the windows out and replace them and things like that. But if there's a local historical society, they generally know the people who are going to be upfront with you on all of that and say, because they want the best for the community as well. Also with the house that we bought, I think one of my biggest tips is when we bought this house, because it had been foreclosed on and it was in such poor shape, the list price was really cheap. But we were like, there's no way we're going to be able to afford to restore the outside of the house. The house is on a street that's on the National Register.
You have to get it to,
Yeah. And we wanted to be, and even if it wasn't, we wanted to honor the house. So like the house had a slate roof that had failed. And we were like, we can't afford a slate roof. There's no way.
Expensive. Yeah.
And but the house price was so cheap. And we could have afforded a house that was maybe 3 times as expensive, but we were like, we don't know if we can, like, do banks loan you more money than the house is worth? Is that a thing that happens?
Right.
And so, talking to people in the community, we found some banks that were really willing to work with us, that knew the houses and knew what was going on, and said, yeah, and we had to submit to them a DIY portfolio and say, here's what we're going to hire out. Here's what we're going to do ourselves. And we ended up finding a bank that was really willing to work with us to help us save the house.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, which is amazing. And those local people are also going to help you be able to find insurers. We've not had a problem insuring our house, but I know that that's a big thing that people ask me all the time, is how do we get insurance for a house that's really old? Yeah. So
I think it depends on the level of insurance you want to.
Absolutely.
Because, yeah.
Yeah. And those are, like, at least to me, those are the hardest. Like, that whole, like, financial legal world is the hardest to navigate. So if you have somebody that's in your town, or that's a neighbor that says, here's who we know and that we've worked with, and word of mouth is just really great. And old house people love to talk about their old houses.
Right.
So, you're not going to, like, if you drive by a house of somebody that has an incredible front yard and you see them outside working on it, they want to talk to you about it. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that's one of the big things, is just not being afraid to ask questions, and to find out what resources you have in the area. And then when you know that it's something you can't handle yourself and you have an expert in there helping, asking questions along the way, taking notes, learning, asking them why they do things, so that you can be able to explain it to other people along the way.
Yeah. I think that's really good advice. I did a presentation last night for the local preservation trust. We had to make our annual meeting online, so it was like a Zoom to 10 people. But it was
Sure.
But it was and I've decided I don't like Zoom presentations, because I'm sitting there, I feel like I'm just talking to myself, because, like, I have no feedback, I have no nobody, I can't see anybody, like, it's like, right. I hate this. So anyway, right. But that's my own. But one of the things that I talked about was finding a contractor that understands old buildings, because new construction people will come in and just say, oh, these are terrible, just rip them out. And I had a conversation today with someone the house is settled, like, on one side, and the windows are all out of square. And he's like, well, should we replace them? I'm like, well, if you replace them, I don't know a replacement window company that's going to put your windows in out of square. So you're still going to have a gap at the bottom. So we can put wood at the bottom of your sash and fix it, or you can get new windows. I mean, the choice is yours, but with your new windows, you're going to have the same problem.
Right, exactly. Yeah, windows are like always the biggest bone of contention. Yeah. So yeah.
Did you do a lot of the work on the windows yourself, or have you not tackled windows?
We have not tackled a lot of the windows. We've done a little bit of work, and we've talked about, like, that's going to be one of our next projects, but it's not, they're not in terrible shape. So that part is good. There are a couple windows that over the years, like the windows in the tower, the turret, are curved. And so some of the windows are original curved glass. Some of them are straight glass that someone put in over the years. And then some of them are like curved plexiglass. So there's a whole mishmash. So at some point we're going to make all of that happen. But the house is pretty airtight, which is nice.
Yeah. Well, and really the windows, you don't lose a lot of air on the walls. It's through the roof. So as long as
and that's another and everyone always thinks that. They're like, oh, I have to replace the windows because then it's going to be more efficient. And it's like, no, it's not. There was an energy auditing company here, Tamison, and she always said, and she was coming from a new house, like, make your house as tight as you can perspective. And she's like, I always say to people, do you want new windows or do you want energy efficiency? Because they're not the same, but you can get new windows. Right.
So what challenges or trends do you see in preservation?
I think challenges are, I think what we see in our community here is just the idea that everyone wants everything to be done really fast. Yeah. And so when you aren't willing to take the time to do things, then you have to cut the corners, and you can't take care of all the details the way that the house wants you to take care of the details.
Right.
And whether it's windows or whether it's like, the roof, and we did end up doing slate on our roof, and we're so happy that we did.
Oh yeah.
But it's one of those things that I think that taking the time to research and figure out what the house wants, like, people will buy a house and, tear out the whole inside before they've lived in it for enough to kind of see how the house works in itself.
Right. Yeah.
I read a story the other day about how people being in quarantine, like the idea of open concept houses, like people are like, we want rooms now instead of open concept
we want to have some space.
we want to be able to close things off. And I'm like, great, this would be like the best thing ever, because,
Right.
I think that old houses were built in such a way, like, new houses, you can build them however you want, because you don't have to worry about how the sun hits the light and how the shade hits the light. And so old architects, like, they knew how to design the house in a way that worked with the weather. And I think that when we try to fight that as a community and try to just put all new modern things in, it doesn't work as well.
No, it doesn't. And because they were inherently energy efficient, because fuel wasn't easy or cheap.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, to me, I wish that everyone would just kind of slow down and figure out a way to do those details on the house right, instead of trying to worry about getting it done in, a month.
Right. No, I agree with you. And that's often one of the first questions that I ask people when we go to see them is like, how are you going to use this space? Like, what does it need to, because if you don't understand that you can't figure out the solution.
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And so I definitely agree with you. Is there anything that you thought of while we were talking that you want to share, that just kind of came up in your brain?
I think that the other thing about like learning how we learn how to do things, I've collected books and magazines over the years, like even if it's on a topic that I don't think I'm necessarily going to use, but like I have books that I've picked up at like, half price books on how to do draperies and the historic nature of draperies, like on the indoors, which is great. Finding resources online on wood moldings and how to do inlaid floors, and finding, like I try to put a lot of that on my blog too, so that people can find those bathroom catalogs and lighting catalogs, and just things for people to look and just get an idea of, okay, this is what happened during the year of my house.
Right.
These are the kinds of things that I'm looking for. And I don't think that everything has to be perfect. Like we are not building a museum. We're building a house that we live in.
That you're going to live in and enjoy. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't want, like when our nieces and nephews come over, I don't want them to have to worry about whether or not they're having to be ginger. But like, things like light fixture, the permanent things, light fixtures, fireplaces, floors, things like that, I want to do. But Victorians were known for, they wanted to put the most modern things in their houses.
And that's always our joke, that colonial houses usually got modernized during the Victorian time. And that's why they're all sagging, because they cut all the support beams to put their bathrooms in.
Oh, right. Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. So that whole concept and idea is it's just hilarious. And so like, at least I hope that I take the approach of the things that aren't permanent in the house. Like, Victorians liked color and pattern on the inside of the house, but maybe I do a more modern pattern on the upholstery and things like that. So it still feels like me, and it's colorful and fun and playful. And it's not stodgy, but it still has this feel of, if people come into my kitchen all the time and they look at the floor, the marble floor, and they're like, oh, this is original. And I'm like, nope, it's not. We put it in. And that's the best compliment someone can give us. And the other thing with that is that we've learned that, like, if you look at that marble floor that we put in, there are imperfections. Like we are not perfect, but that's okay, because once it's in, like, if you have one tile that's a little bit cracked once you put it in because maybe something didn't settle right, it adds to the whole realistic nature of the house. It makes it kind of look like it's always
character.
Yeah. Right. And it doesn't mean that you do a terrible job on things, but
Right.
you don't sweat because these houses, they're not level, they're not plumb, they're not square. And so you're not ever going to be 100% perfect, and that's
Right.
okay.
Yeah. I think that's very, very true for living in an older house, because there's you have to, and working on an older house, there's a balance there where you're not going to get it perfectly level, you're not going to get it perfectly straight, so you have to get it to where you can tolerate it, where
Right.
it's not gonna trip your OCD, but other than
Right.
that.
Absolutely.
So, well, how can someone contact you or visit your blog?
They can absolutely, on the blog, vivaciousvictorian.com. There's a spot where they can contact me, and that'll send me an email. And I definitely try to get back to all of those as much as I can. I also have an Instagram account, which you can find that on the blog. But my handle on Instagram is Amy Lee, LEIGH _1902 Victorian. And so I have a lot of people reach out there as well. And on Instagram, I have I run a old house feature, like community feature. I call it 52 Weeks of Home, where every week I have a theme. And so, 1 week it might be bathrooms. 1 week it might be things that you found at a flea market. 1 week it might be woodwork, where just people post and they share. It's like a show and tell. It's like an adult show and tell for your house for the whole year.
Oh,
and
that's really fun.
Yeah. And so people share different things, and, and then we all drool over everybody else's things that we don't have in our house. Like we don't have lots of stained glass in our house, but other people do. And it's just like, it's mind blowing to see what other people have. So that's
what I would love about having a Victorian house, would be the stained glass.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, very good. Well, thank you so much for coming on with me today. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's see. Oops, I stopped. Oh.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.